In this segment of our video series on editing terrain, we're going to talk about how to place water throughout our world. Water in the terrain engine is represented by a plane. Planes can be oriented horizontally, vertically, or any angle in between. Therefore, you can make effects like small basins of water, waterfalls, or little small lakes. So to get started, we're going to double-click our default water entity and click somewhere in the middle of our basin. Notice the water plane is created where we clicked. Now we want to actually translate our water plane up a little bit in order to get some water level in our terrain. Next, we want to switch to terrain interaction mode so our water won't actually be selected and highlighted. In Scene Designer, if you select entities, you'll see that they become highlighted. However, on the water, it makes it look a little strange to have blue water blended with our selection highlight color. So to turn that off, we need to go back to the Terrain tool. Note, our water is still selected even though it's not highlighted, so we can edit the properties and get feedback as they appear. First, we need to change the size of our water plane to fit within our little basin. So to do that, we're going to use the Scale tool and scale our plane. As you can see, we've now scaled our water plane to fit within the area that we want the water to appear. Now we'll switch back to the Terrain tool and edit some additional properties of the water. First, we need to edit the Terrain Entity property. The Terrain Entity property is used to associate the water plane with the terrain for blending and transparency effects. So clicking on the ellipses, we'll see we can browse to a terrain entity, select it, and press OK. Now you can see our water is pretty transparent. It doesn't look very good yet, but after we adjust some more properties, we'll achieve a much nicer looking effect. So next, we want to edit the normal map directory. As I said earlier, the water is animated using a series of animated normal maps. Normal maps are stored in a single directory and are named such that this file name mask matches with the mask or names of the list of files, which you'll see in a minute. So if we click the ellipses on the normal map directory, we need to browse and find our normal maps. In this case, we're going to go to the Gamebryo installation folder and use the normal maps in the terrain demo, Gamebryo sample. So we're in the samples directory under data, and we're going to choose water normal maps and click OK. Notice nothing happened yet. If we browse to that directory where we just chose the animated normal maps, you'll see that each frame in the animated normal map are numbered water underscore and then the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, etc. We need to set our file name mask to map to that naming convention. So to do that, we go and edit our file name mask, and we change this to water underscore and then the name of the frame or the number of the frame, and press enter. So as you can see, we now have some form of animated water, but it still doesn't look very good because we see through it way too strongly. So before we change the see-through or the opaqueness or the density of the water, let's go ahead and add an environment map. In this version of Terrain, water is reflected through a static environment map. Again, in our Terrain data folder, choose the Reflection DDS texture. Now we can see our water looks a little bit better since we have some reflections on it. We have a bit of ripple from our animated normal maps. And we have a little bit of shoreline transparency. Next, we want to increase the resolution of our mask texture. Our mask texture is used to blend the shore, or the edges of the water, with our terrain. So let's change that to be 256 by 256. You'll now notice that the edges are a little bit crisper. Next, we want to adjust some additional properties of the water. First, we want the fall off of the water to be a little stronger, meaning that we want the water to be more opaque the deeper it goes. So let's change this value to 0.7. And as you can see, as the water gets towards the center of our basin, it becomes a little darker and less transparent. We also want to up the reflection factor. Currently, our environment map is producing minimal results in terms of how it's rendered. We want to adjust that strength. So let's change the reflection factor to 2. Now we've changed it back to 0.5. Let's try 0.8. That gives us a decent result. See, as I rotate, see that there's a little bit more shininess on the water. Next, we'll tweak our specular factor. Now we can see we're starting to get some water that looks pretty good. We have a nice smooth transition between the shore and the water. And we have some nice little waves on the water. Again, I would encourage you to tweak these different parameters. Our depth threshold, for example, we can modify. And the depth threshold works in conjunction with the fall off, such that the water around the shore is more transparent or more opaque. For instance, if we adjust this to 100, you'll see that again the water becomes a little more see-through. If we adjust it to 5, you can hardly see through the water at all, and we have just this little tiny border around the edges of our water where it meets the terrain. Let's change it back to 50. And that allows us to see a nice little shoreline and to see our rippling waves. So this concludes our series on placing water in the terrain. Again, we could place several of these water entities in various different parts of the terrain and maybe orienting them such that you can have a vertical waterfall or a body of water that goes down the slope of the terrain.